Hello and welcome back to the Clark and Miller English podcast. And if it's your first time listening, then just welcome. Welcome here. It's good to have you here. Right, so today I have an interesting conversation that I had with Shanthi Cumaraswamy Streat. She's a business communication trainer, and she helps out people from all over the world get better at communicating in business settings. Now, this is an interesting podcast because sometimes, if you know the Clark and Miller English podcast, we have blue ones and we have red ones. Blue ones are especially for students and red ones are kind of more for teachers or just for people interested in linguistics. And I have to be honest, I wasn't sure which colour to make this one because in my conversation with Shanthi, a lot of interesting things came up. Things that would be interesting for people who are learning English, especially for English in business settings. And also for people who teach English and people who want to teach business English or have to teach business English, whatever that is. So, I think one of the nice things about this podcast is that it's very useful, I hope, for both people who are learning English and people who are teaching English, and we can bring these worlds together. There's no reason why, if you're learning English, you shouldn't understand how your teachers think and how teaching works, because that can help you learn more and learn better and learn faster. And as an English teacher, there's no reason why you shouldn't listen to stuff that is really helpful for students, because then you can find some excellent ways of making things helpful for students yourself. So, in the spirit of that, I think today is an unofficial purple episode. I think this episode is especially useful if you need English for work and business settings. You need to use English on a regular basis in sort of corporate business environments, and you need to know what's useful and what isn't. And I think if you listen to the conversation today, you'll be quite surprised by what is useful and what isn't useful. Also, if you're an English teacher, like me, and you really hate teaching business English, like me, then this is going to be very useful for you, because I talked to Shanthi from a position of someone who really dislikes the world of business English a lot, and I learnt so much, and I actually feel a lot more comfortable about that world having talked to Shanthi. So you'll probably find loads of really cool tips from this conversation. I'm not going to keep you any longer. Let's get straight into this conversation that I have with Shanthi. And I guess the whole thing of this conversation is, does business English exist? What is it? What is the point of it? And how can we improve our communications, either in business settings or just generally as well? You'll be surprised how much these two worlds come together. So without any further ado, let's get going, and I'll talk to you again at the end. All right, let's get going. I'm here with Shanthi Cumaraswamy Streat, who, I won't say anything. I will let her introduce herself. So Shanthi, welcome on board. Good to have you here.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be here.
It's great to have you here. Really, it is. And could you introduce yourself? Tell us all about you and everything you do.
Right. Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. How long do you have? Yes. Shanthi Cumaraswamy Streat. I am a business English coach or business English teacher, whatever you want to call me. I am based in the UK, and I work with business professionals. Being a coach is a new career. Well, maybe not really. I started in 2010. Prior to that, I worked in the world of finance for 20 years, and always based in the UK. So just give you a background. So I grew up in Malaysia and Italy. I'm half Malaysian, half Italian. And I came to university here in the UK in 85, just shows how old I am. And after that, I went into the world of finance for about 20 years and then retrained as a English teacher, first and foremost, in 2010. Went down the traditional route, as it were, sort of working with schools, and I also did immersion programs. So I was a host tutor here, and went on to the online scene around about 2013 when I started my blog and my mini business called English with a Twist. And since then, I've built up my online presence, really, in terms of developing my own clients, working one-to-one with clients online, offering online programs and mini workshops. And I've also developed my social media presence.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, yes, I mean, you have a blog,
yes,
with English with a Twist, but you were saying that you're a coach as well. So, what kind of people come to you, and what kind of services do they get? Is it business focused coaching, and is it language focused and business focused, or do you focus more on the business or more on the language, or everything?
Well, it always starts with the English, because if you see my website, it says I'm a business English coach. And I know you have lots of interesting thoughts, Gabriel, on that.
We'll get to that.
Yes. So they start business professionals. So I focus on them. So people who are using English in their working life. And they come first and foremost because of their English. Mm-hmm. So, they come in as they're wanting an English language teacher. So, that's where I started. And so they'd come. And the reason it went down business was I was more interested in working with professionals as opposed to university students, pre-university students, children, or people wanting English to go on holiday. I didn't want that sort of holiday English and all that. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to use my background in business to work with like-minded people.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So they come to me first for language rather than maybe business communication.
Mm-hmm. But they all need their English for business, for working in the business world.
Yes.
Yeah, I see. Cool. All right, cool. So yeah, so you run your blog, which is doing very well, right? It's quite a successful blog. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, it is. Thank
and
you.
That's englishwithatwist.com, am I correct?
Yes.
All one word.
Yes.
English with a Twist. I like the name as well. How did you come up with that one? It's really unique. Even, now it still is, but even back in 2013, it would have been a unique one.
Yeah. I started off the blog with the title, Your World is Your Oyster. Mm-hmm. Then gradually people said to me, well, if this is aimed for international speakers of English, that idiom will not, that won't make sense necessarily. And it's not, it doesn't, people will be wondering what on earth is this blog about.
It could be about anything, right?
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So I changed it to English with a Twist. And why the twist? The twist in English is always with a difference, that mm-hmm. if we look at it in terms of the meaning. So I just wanted to offer, English, but offering something different, not as you would expect.
Cool. Yeah, no, it's a great name. It does that. It gives you that impression straight away. Yeah, nice one. Great. Okay, so we've got an idea about who you are and what you do. And today we're going to be talking about something that for me is actually strangely controversial, I suppose, because of my, I don't know, how can I put this? My background, my feelings, my perception or misperception or misconception rather of the world of business English. Nothing sends shivers up my spine more than somebody telling me I have to go and do a business English class.
Right, and I wonder why. Well, what is it that comes in to your mind when that happens?
I don't know, because I've been trying to figure this out quite a lot recently. A lot of work has sort of, I've been getting involved in quite a few different things recently, work-wise, in interviews and seminars and stuff like that. And this business English thing is coming back to haunt me. And so I felt like, okay, let's deal with this. Let's tackle this thing head on. I started exploring. And I think a lot of the reasons that I don't like business English is simply because it's not a world I've ever been involved in. So I find it alien and alienating.
Alienating.
It's a personal thing. I think it's a lot of it's unreasonable. It's just a sort of reaction against something I don't understand so much, perhaps. But we're going quite deep here. We'll get back to that.
Yes.
But let me hit you with the first question, if that's all right.
Sure.
Okay. It's I see sort of a kind of spectrum, and we've got ESP on one end. So ESP is English for specific purposes, where somebody needs to just be able to be a nurse in an international hospital, and you just teach them a script for every situation they'll need, more or less. Simplified, but essentially that's it. So in its extreme form, the student doesn't really need to use English as a language at all, like not as a communicative living thing. They need something that will stop them crashing planes or help them take blood. And they tend to just really have a script, not really a sort of functional knowledge of the language. But then you've got the business world. And the business world is kind of the opposite, because you need to use the full spectrum of language. You need to be able to communicate like naturally and spontaneously and all this sort of stuff. So I'm not sure how helpful this spectrum is, but I think with the business English world, or using English in a business setting, shall we say, I still don't see a big difference between that and general English. So for me, using the language on a full spectrum of communication and emotional, sort of expressing yourself emotionally and dealing with complicated situations like negotiating meaning and whatever, all the many things that a language can do. What makes it businessy, I suppose, is my question.
Yeah, good question. And thank you for the question, because I was thinking about this. And I think it's, when I started and I said, I want to go into specialize more in the business English. And yes, that was that whole, but for me, there wasn't anything specific about, there's a type of language, a type of business English, because my idea when we talk about business language, we would often be talking about buzzwords and jargon that, as as we all know, a lot of our clients will already be aware of that, because depending on different industries, then you have all that sort of specific speak, whether it's legal speak, finance speak, all that. But for me, I think, you're right. There isn't really, if we think about it, a difference between general English and business English. I think it comes down to what is the purpose of that piece of communication. And there is a difference in my mind between business communication and general communication.
Okay, let's narrow down to that then. Okay, so we're temporarily abandoning terms like business English and general English, but business communication and general communication. Okay, so what do you see as the difference there? Yeah,
so for me, the first thing I've always done is take the language out. I've discovered to just remove the language. Okay. The language is just a tool. This is at the beginning, because at the beginning I used to be exactly that. We'll do the business English stuff. But it is about communication. What's the difference between general and business? In my mind, and to where I see it with my clients, is business communication has a very clear focus. It has an outcome.
Okay.
You have a very clear outcome. And take, for example, a meeting or presentation in a meeting. There is a specific goal in that presentation. There is something you want your audience to do, whether it's just absorbing information, whether there is a call to action, in terms of you want them to sign that contract, you want them to accept your proposal.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a very real objective that you want to achieve. You don't really have time to spend years trying to understand how to order a coffee. I don't care about ordering that coffee. I don't need that. I need to be very clear about my message,
mm-hmm.
the outcome I want,
mm-hmm.
and to be very clear on how I'm going to communicate that in a way that my audience understands and are clear as to what I want them to do.
Okay.
That's the difference I over the years discovered, because most clients come to you and then they'll say, it's my English.
Mm-hmm.
But I soon discovered it had nothing to do with their English.
Ah.
It was to do with that they really hadn't thought about how they were communicating.
Communication strategies were more important than, grammar, for example.
Absolutely, because how are you communicating that meeting? How are you people would sort of say, I really don't know how to handle questions. I need more vocabulary, because I go blank. And so I try and break it down with them. And I'd look at, okay, so how do you do this already in your own language? How do you communicate? You're managing a team, for example. If you look at leadership skills, and I think that's where we're talking about business communication. It's about how do you motivate your team? How do you lead your team? How do you communicate with your clients? How do you build relationships with your clients? How do you manage an international team? There's so much more in business communication than what we perceive as general communication, which is what people will say to you. I want to manage my small talk, or I want to manage, great. But you're not going to lose business if you don't quite manage your small talk. But if you're in the middle of a contract negotiation, we have to be crystal clear as to what you want to achieve.
So it sounds to me that, like you said, you took the language out of it because, and also the way you describe many of your clients is that their level is quite decent. Like they're competent language learners, but they're lacking something else that isn't really a language-based thing, but more of a sort of, should we just call it a soft skill? Or I don't know if that's the best word for it, because it's quite, I'm getting sidetracked. That's quite a sort of ambiguous and potentially misleading term, soft skills. I'm not sure.
I know sometimes you feel it's almost not that important. It tends to be, we kind of, it's a nice to have, but not a must have. When actually I think it's a crucial skill.
Mm-hmm. It's like a core one.
Yeah.
But
here's the thing. I mean, yes, the clients, my ideal clients, if we can call them that, are people who are very, who use English every day, very regularly, and so comfortable with the language. I'm not necessarily talking about advanced speakers. Not all of them are.
Mm-hmm.
So often they come and they weren't necessarily, clearly confident speakers. And sure, they made mistakes or they couldn't quite find the words that they want. And yes, they could build a vocabulary. So they come in. But what I started realizing, they come and they all do this, right? Oh, I want to speak like a native speaker. I want to speak faster. I want to speak without pausing. I want to. Then I break it down. I'd ask them, let's look at your business reality. Please talk me through what is happening in your working life. Who are you dealing with and who are you using English with? Eventually, then they'd start telling me, and the majority of them are using English with other international speakers of English.
Okay. This is an interesting area in and of itself. But what does this? Go on. What does it mean to for your guys?
So, as I'm talking to them, they would have, yes, I'm dealing with my Chinese suppliers. I'm dealing with my Indian call centers, or whatever. Or so I'd say, okay, typically in your meeting, your conference call, well, who are the participants? Where are they from?
Mm-hmm.
It had Turkey, Sweden, Italians, France, Germany. Think, okay. And what's their level of English? How does that go? Well, typically you'd have your Scandinavians had higher level of English. Your Middle Eastern speakers would have less English. I'm not stereotyping, but typically based on, their... So, okay, so how's it go? Mistakes? Oh, yes. Okay. And then I'll try and break it down and ask them, so who's easier to understand?
Mm-hmm.
What's going on? So, as I probed, we worked out, so how does it go? Give me an example of a conference call. What's going on in there? Who do you understand better? Now, why is it that you can understand them better? What is going on in there? Because they're making the mistakes. And the mistakes were irrelevant for them. So why is it you understand them better? I had a particular client, and I loved, in fact, I ended up writing a blog post about it. She came, oh, it's terrible, Shanthi, I cannot manage this. And now she was one of the compliance directors in her country. So, not just some little unimportant job. And they were working in a team. Now, the head of compliance for the entire international group was American. Everybody else, different areas of the world. Mm-hmm. So we were talking, she was just, my English is terrible, my grammar is horrendous, I got to get better, it's all my fault and it's all my fault. So when we broke it down, she gave me who it was. And then I asked her this question, so who is easier to understand? Mm-hmm. So she said, yes, so-and-so, the Polish person is fine, this person. So we broke it down. Why are they easy? Then she had a Swedish number 2. Mm-hmm. The person she found the most difficult was the American.
Right. I was predicting that.
So we broke it down. And so I did ask her, I want you to reflect. I want you to analyze this. So go away. These are the questions I want you to ask yourself. Then she came back and I said, okay, break it down. You have your Swedish number 2, no problem. And your American problem. It was always, let's check the email she sends afterwards just to follow what, she said. And he broke it down and he says, well, what he does is he speaks a bit slower, but he asks a lot of questions along the way to check whether we've all understood. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of good communication skills that was coming. Whereas the American boss, she was oblivious to the fact that she had an international speaking team. She would just talk.
And she wouldn't grade her language. Mm-hmm.
No, not grade. But more importantly, she wouldn't even pause to check if everyone was following her. Now, considering you're in a conference call, so there's absolutely no way, this is before virtual meetings and before COVID-19. So you're in a situation where nobody can see each other. So you already have the tech issues. Then you're not pausing. You're not stopping to check if someone is understanding or if they're following you. You're not asking for their opinion. Whereas she found that the Swedish boss was doing that. So they found it easier because it was breaking things up.
Yeah.
So by the end of our program together, she was here with me for about a week. Mm-hmm. She realized it had nothing to do with her English. It was the communication styles between the different speakers. And that's why the more, and she's not just one example. Time and time again, I kept having the clients who had the same issues.
And lots of research backs this up as well, because I got really into lingua franca English when I was doing my master's, and it's amazing that not only that the native speakers are the least easy to, had the lowest communication skills when they were speaking to non-native speakers, but even studies showing native speaker communication skills with other native speakers was lower than people speaking English as a second language with each other. So none of this surprises me.
Yeah, I mean, it was just interesting. I'm interested in your research. So they discovered that. Yeah, and
not
why
my
do they
research.
think it was? Yeah. Okay, no, but research
I checked. I saw. Yeah.
And was there a reason they gave? I mean, was there?
Well, actually, interestingly, this has totally been analysed. The very things that you were just saying. So it's about sort of bridging strategies, and reiterating things, saying things again. So what were there? There's things like repeating something, but in different words. So, reformulating something, asking, exactly as you said, asking if the person has been following, asking if the person has understood what they've been saying. And also from the other side, double checking that they have themselves understood what the other person is saying. Lots of this sort of stuff going on. Like native speakers don't really do that, and certainly not with other native speakers, not as much as perhaps they should. So this is that's the answer. Exactly the things you've observed.
But do you really think it's just? I don't think it's necessarily just the English native speaker. I think all of us are like that.
Well, this is, the studies only covered English native speakers.
Yeah, but I remember I had another client here, German. He didn't have a high level of English, but we were talking about this because eventually he had a small international team. But, for years, and this is another situation I found with a lot of my clients of a particular age, for years they've only had to work with their own language, and suddenly now with globalization, mergers, they're ending up suddenly in a team of international speakers, and they panic. This particular client, and it was really interesting to also understand his work, because he was very strong in the trade union movement, with the work committees in big companies in Germany. And fascinating. Now, he explained all this stuff to me in English. So when they tell me, my English is bad, I'm thinking, well, you're just describing a lot of very intricate stuff that for me it's new, and you're able to do that. But we talked about this communication. And then I asked him at one point, I said, okay, how do you do this? How do you manage your meetings in German? Do you pause to check whether your team are following you? And as he started thinking about it, he goes, you know what? No, I don't. I've never paused. I just assume they're following me. So I said, it's interesting, because the more I've worked with my clients, the more we realize together that this does transcend language. Often they have realized that they're not such strong communicators in their own language. But that's because most of us limit the idea of communication to speaking. If we're good speakers, we're eloquent, we use all these fabulous words, then we're good communicators. But no, communication goes beyond that.
No. I think as teachers, I certainly have, I'm sure you have too, that after teaching for a while, you start discovering the power of simplicity in communication. And because, when you're talking to people with all sorts of different levels of English, you have to start grading, you have to be able to express yourself more clearly, and you start developing these skills in your own language. And then whenever I go back home to England, like I start standing out as somebody who can actually express themselves very, very clearly, just because I'm so used to doing this and being able to sort of express things simply and directly. So I think you're right. And maybe it's just a human thing when it's your first language and you're not thinking about it. If the other people in the room are also speaking your first language, you maybe just assume an automatic telepathic sort of thing happening.
Yeah. I think also the biggest thing, which is we don't listen enough.
Yeah.
And when we talk about business communication, going back to our original business communication, the huge part is listening. Particularly if you're thinking about leadership, managing teams. If you're going to be a good leader and a motivational leader, you need to learn to listen. You need to give your team the time to reflect and participate. I ran a little, during the COVID-19, with my email community, my email list, I ran a series of what I call Corona-free chats. And one of the topics we did in one of it was leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So I had some reflection prompts, and then they came back, and based on their experiences with leaders, thinking, who do you admire the most, and who, who's been your mentor, and it always came back time and time again, the leaders who listened,
Mm-hmm.
the leaders who weren't immediately the first to start giving you their opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you think about it also in our normal day-to-day, right? You say something and the person just jumps in and starts talking, and you think, could you just let me speak? And particularly when we're dealing with international speakers we're all nervous.
Mm-hmm.
We're all trying to figure this out ourselves. Gosh, I'm not able to express myself. How do I do this? So how do you give each other the time? And for me, the biggest thing now I've learned, because I'm the same, and I think it's a work in progress with all of us, to learn to pause. If you're going to ask a question,
Mm-hmm.
pause and give that person time, but not be afraid of those pauses. I don't know about you, I'm sure you have, I want to speak without pausing. I said, well, really fantastic. So that's only serving your purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In that meeting, who are you? You are just the one talking, or do you want the people to actually be listening?
Yeah.
So give them the time to absorb what you're saying, and give yourself all the time. So you suddenly lose your train of thought. Pause.
Mm-hmm.
It might be that you just suddenly got distracted. It's not maybe to do with your English. Think about in your own environment, what would happen?
Yeah, this happens to everyone, the best of us. Yeah. And okay, so, we've got these really, really, really useful pieces of advice. Things like, make sure other people have followed you, confirm that you've understood, reformulate things if somebody doesn't understand, all these bridging strategies, plus the very underrated and valuable advice of listening and pausing, because that's golden too. But you know what I'm going to say, right? This is also general communication too. This is all useful stuff for your own life, not just in the business context. So I still ask the question, where's the difference?
There isn't as I mentioned earlier, there isn't. If we're going to be, okay, let's break it down to the basics. Where is the difference? No, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
No real difference. I think it comes down, in my mind, to the importance and the necessity in certain contexts. And I think in a business context, particularly there are people who are working with English, and to be honest, the biggest part of the biggest portion of when they use English, well, certainly with my clients, is when they're working, as opposed to necessarily having the socializing outside work.
Mm-hmm.
So the main part for them is at work. So for me, the focus is first develop that area that you need to develop in order to get a job done.
So could it be less in the general picture, but more in the type of activities you actually do? So instead of simulating, I don't know, like trying to convince your auntie to come with you on holiday, you're simulating like trying to nail a contract in the business environment. So the strategies can be universal, but the sort of practices, the exercises to learn those strategies are set in different contexts.
Yeah, it's the practical application. What is a priority?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's because I attract people who are coming and saying, I need this for work, because the thing is, for me, the majority of people need English for work.
Yeah.
I don't know what your experience. Mine is very, nobody really learns English anymore because of the love of Shakespeare and because they want to come to Britain and enjoy the weather.
and the red pillar boxes and the men in the top hats.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The vast majority now in the global world need English to get that job, to get that promotion, to manage suddenly a merger.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that is what they need. They don't. People come to me, yes, in the past, I want to be able to manage small talk.
Okay. Yeah. I want to jump on that because you brought it up earlier as well. And obviously this does change from different teaching contexts to different teaching contexts. And I think this might be a big difference between your students and my students, because my students tend to be, I'm thinking of one particular place I work. They tend to be given the lessons by HR, and that the deal is that they do this business English syllabus. So I did actually some research and I checked out all the needs analysis of my students over the last 4 years. And I found that something like 83% wanted not just business English. And you were talking about the students who come to you saying, I can do all the stuff at work, but I'm drowning when it comes to the social afterwards. And I know that, like, you're right, like priorities are very important. And, you know, the main purpose of their learning English is to do things like, you know, sort the merger deal out or whatever it is. But isn't this business relationship stuff, like the social side of things, because a lot of business English course books have this one like lip service section to small talk and the rest is hard business. But isn't all of this quite integrated? Like you operate on a sort of professional but also on a social level when you're doing all this stuff. And in some cultures more than others, like going down the pub or meeting in restaurants or having you know, just talking about your family and discussing you know, issues you have with your car or whatever it is, like all of this stuff can be quite valuable too. And I know that there are different priorities and maybe we shouldn't even be separating these concepts, but where do you stand with students who say, I'm fine with the business stuff, I do it all the time at work, I need to be able to like do the social stuff? And maybe you don't get as many students.
No. Don't get me wrong. I mean, when I say I've got my clients who come and, you know, maybe their first is the lack of confidence when they're presenting and things. But then inevitably, if they are, then they of course they're going to be interacting with their colleagues or their clients in that social environment. Absolutely. So they'll come along. And I used to take this very prescriptive method, which is what we all learn. It's, you know, when you're training. So you get that book out, you get that small talk bit, and it's all got the, you know, all the sentences and gap fill exercises. And I used to do that because inexperienced, and I was thinking, oh yes, you know, this was also a crutch for me because I didn't know what I was doing half the time. And great, and it was fine. But like we all know, you complete these exercise sheets, and then you promptly forget all about them when you're in front of that moment. And I struggled with that because I always thought, well, how can I help them? How can I help them? And here's the thing: this is what recently I discovered was, you know, I get that, the small talk, you know, I need that English. And so now one day I sort of asked a few clients, I said, what do you like in small talk in your own language? I mean, how do you like it? Do you enjoy it? And some of them would go, no, I don't. So okay, so how do you manage it? You know, the fact that, you have to, well, I'll ask one question and maybe I sit back and listen. So it was interesting because there's one part, so if we take these two different parts, you're introverts. So they hate small talk. They just hate it even in their own language. They'll run a mile. So I would sort of turn around and say to them, so why is it that you need to master small talk in English if it's the one thing you absolutely hate and you have strategies to avoid it? when you're doing it in your own language? They go, good question. So I said, what I'm saying is, no, fine, you need to deal with it, but don't castigate yourself because you are not this great small talker in English. Because if you're not in your own language, why put yourself under that enormous pressure? So let's work with, what would you normally do? So what sort of topics are you interested in? And what are you curious about when you first meet a person? What do you want to find out about them? And so they'd start telling me. I said, okay. So, and then we start talking with, I'm thinking, there you go. You've just asked me, you've explored. I said, okay, so if you're interested in that topic, where could you find out a bit more about it in order to then ask the questions you're interested in? So it's really, taking it from them. I think if it were me with small talk, what am I interested about that person? Is it because when they come to us, they want us to feed them with all that language. I'm thinking, I can give you that course book and I can give you a whole bunch of stuff. Let's talk about, football. Let's talk about, the whole usual movies and, what television. If that's not what you're interested
sports. There's always extreme sports in there.
Right? I'm like, do you do any of that? No. I'm like, so why are we having that conversation? So I tap in, I go, what are you curious about? What would you like to find out about that person? And then you only really have to ask a few questions and let them do the talking. At the end of the day, small talk is not about you.
Yeah.
It's about the other person.
Yeah.
So when you start opening, learn a few open questions, sit back and listen to them. Then, okay, so, I know that they'll go, I don't think of the book, but does it really matter if you're motivated by your curiosity? If you don't have that perfect word or you can't find that perfect word, who cares? The fact that you're interested in that person, you're showing that, and you really want to know about them, that should be the first motivator, not the, can I get that right word in English?
Yeah. And that is what language is about. It's not about learning a script. It's not about learning words. It starts with a human interaction. The language should follow from that. So this is great. This is really good advice to motivate people into learning a language in any way. Just focus exactly on what you need to do first and then just do that.
Yeah, just be your natural self in terms of, natural self. It's so easy for me, for us to say that. But I just think, well, what would you do? What do you normally do? That's the question I always ask. What do you normally do? Well, this is what I do. Okay, so how could you apply that with the English you already have to start off with, to give you that confidence? Because the problem is that when we say, well, we want to add all this language, you get yourself into a situation where you start panicking because I remember that word, and why is that word not coming up to my mind? And suddenly everything just collapses because you're too focused on that one word that you learn. I have this sometimes in Italian. I beat myself up because I'll think, I can't remember that word, that great word I saw, and I really want to use it. And at that moment, I can't remember it. And does it matter if you then find some other word or come up with some other example? Because as we both say, it's the social interaction that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I have a sort of strange image in my head because as you're describing this, and images come to my head really easily as metaphors, I'm imagining like a big field of grass that needs to be cut. But like this, a lot of students do come to us, teachers, with this sort of preconception that they need to cut every single square inch of that entire giant field of grass when they don't. And when you were talking, I just sort of imagined this, and you just drive the lawnmower where you want. You want to go to that bit, you want that bit to be cut, then go to that bit. You want that bit to be cut, then go to that bit. But only go to the bits that you need. Because if you try to mow that entire lawn, well, for a start, that's millions of words, which is just not going to happen. And so much of it you don't need. You don't need to talk about NASA space training in English, probably. So why would you pick up all those phrases? Is this a fair sort of analysis of what you're getting at?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you can't go against your own personality. This is my point. Sometimes I think, well, so that's why I ask. I mean, how do you feel about small talk? Do you enjoy it? Or are you just doing it because you have to? So, okay, so if it's something that you just have to, what would you normally do? And how quickly do you give it before you walk away from that situation? Say you're at a conference, you're chatting over coffee. There are going to be times also when you really cannot be bothered. Come on, how many times have we sat there going, I just want quiet time? But you feel compelled. So in that situation, what do? The quick chit chat. Oh yes, how are you thinking? What was that last conversation? That last talk? And very interesting. Oh, I must go. I'm thinking, yeah, just do that. I mean, you don't have to put yourself under that pressure of, I don't have English and that's why I'm not able to. Maybe it's because you cannot be bothered. You don't like the guy, or you don't like the person, or they're not even being responsive to you, and you're like, oh, really? I'm off.
Forget it then.
Just go. So for me, it's almost, when I talk to clients and, they beat themselves up, it's just always criticizing themselves. They're so critical. And I think, relax. Because let's see, what about that moment when you had that? Or, what happened? He goes, oh, yeah. And what would you do normally? I just walk away. Great. But just because it's in English doesn't mean you can't walk away.
Yeah, this is really valuable. I'm making some notes because there's some really good tips here, and I'm going to come out with them at the end. Because you make yourself reflect about what you do and what you do as yourself in your first language. Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm gonna bounce to the next question, if that's all right. It's about course books, business English course books. Perhaps this is one of the reasons why I became so petrified of business English as a concept and always ran for the hills every time somebody mentioned it. Yet some of them can be really irrelevant to the student's needs. I'm thinking of one particularly guilty party, which I'm not going to mention, this course book, but you'll have a module on logistics, and then you'll have a module on HR vocabulary, and then you have a module on IT. And it's like, unless you're a CEO, or unless you're a general manager, or unless you're in a startup and you have to jump between tasks and fields all the time, most people don't really need to know this stuff. I mean, it's useful, sure, but the IT guy doesn't need to know like obscure logistics terminology, for example. So, I mean, the next step, the logical step for me there is it's like, okay, just give the logistics stuff to the logistics guys, the marketing stuff to the marketing guys, maybe a bit of finance there because there is a bit of a crossover, a cross interest, but generally speaking. But then what are you left with? You're left with a general English course with some supplemented business materials. So, I mean, I'm obviously quite stubbornly clinging onto this idea of like, does business English exist? I guess because it's a bit of a hot take, and I think you've actually already answered it quite well. But yeah, how do you deal with course books like that? And I mean, I guess you don't. Do you work with course books?
No, I don't. No.
It feels, I can sense that.
I used to, of course, when you're starting out and you do, and in fact, I think I know which books you're referring to, but I've got them all, and they're all still here. I haven't looked at them in years. But at the beginning, yes, you need that support. But you're absolutely right. I mean, to your earlier point, when you said about English for specific purposes, if you're into logistics, they already have that language. If they're in finance, they already have that language. But then to involve everyone, I mean, I suppose because I work one-to-one with people, I'm not in a classroom scenario. So if we're working in a group scenario, they don't need, if they're all logistics people, they don't need it. It comes down to communication. So I think this whole general English business, I would like to call it communication. Communication skills. How do you communicate amongst yourselves? Because let's face it, many of us have found ourselves in meetings, business meetings, where you have a selection of different people from different departments. So you've got IT guy, you've got HR, you've got marketing, but they all have their different strands and they all are talking. But at the end of the day, you are having to communicate with all of them in a way that everyone understands, not leaving anyone out. So you're going to cut the jargon, you're going to cut out all that specific techie words, and even the IT guy will start coming out with his geeky words. You kind of think, well, excuse me, could you explain that to me? Because I really don't understand. So it's learning how to talk generally. Yes, let's go back to general English, but just generally, let's talk the talk that everyone knows. When you look at I never know how to pronounce this word. Etymologically, the word communication means to make common.
Oh, I never thought about that. That's good. To make something common. Communication. Yeah, of course.
So why are we complicating matters? Why do we have to give them all this sort of stuff that nobody will ever use? Nobody will ever remember as soon as they go back to the office. And it is, but for me, it's okay. So you guys are from different. You're in a meeting. How are you guys going to communicate so that the person from IT can understand marketing, and that he doesn't necessarily, the marketing situation, what's going on with the company and how they're doing this, instead of switching off and checking his phone, because this is just so dull. I mean, the number of meetings I've been in where you think, oh, seriously, I don't want to be in this meeting. And because that's people's reality. Then, they're umpteen meetings, so boring, such time wasters. And, okay, so how do you manage that? How do you manage so everyone understands? And anyone talks about what is relevant for all of them, not just this specific. So going back to your question about course books, I do find them, I used to do this diligently, giving my clients, where you have your course book, you have the article, and then you have the listening piece, and then you have this, so go through it. One, I ended up being so bored to tears myself. Like, oh, seriously, life's too short, there's got to be better stuff. And they diligently did that, but because they expected us as teachers to be doing this. Oh, my teacher's here. This is what's expected of me. They're just going to give me this, and I'm going to do it. And then when you think about it, you think, they go back, and I'm thinking, well, did that help? When they go back to the next meeting they go to, or they're in front of their computer writing an email, did that actually help, all that stuff I gave them? And when you find, when you talk to them in the end, no, it didn't. Because finish the program, put all the stuff, their vocabulary sheets away, and they're done. You haven't given them anything that they can apply. I mean, I've spoken to some clients who, of course, like you said, HR gives them this tick the box English language program course, because HR has to say that we offered our employees. Yeah. And they all turn up. Then they go and have one-to-one sessions. I go, so how's your group? He goes, waste of time. I'm not interested in learning about this bit. I need to learn about, how I can apply, because it would become too generic. There's the whole thing about it also can be too generic. And they go, well, I don't need that bit. Or I don't need so much grammar. I'm not interested in that. And it was interesting because what they try to do is one size fits all, and you can't.
Yeah, you can't do that. Yeah, that's also the same with general English as well. Nobody needs extreme sports, for example. Yeah, that's great. So I think we're on the same page with the course books. That I'm gonna say is a potentially controversial statement, but the course books are guilty of business English, and they should be practicing business communication. Not all the course books. The course books we have in mind.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think now we are moving towards what is business communication, like you mentioned, international communication. Yeah. So it is now, what's our reality? And I think a lot of the course books that I said are a bit outdated, and they tend to be, right? As soon as textbook comes out, they're already slightly out of date. Yeah. With regard to the reality of what's going on, most people are dealing with other international speakers of English. They're not dealing with native speakers necessarily. Not all of them are. So how do you give them the coping strategies And for me, that's what I'm doing. I'm giving them the coping strategies to manage those situations where they are going to find themselves, in difficulty. So, for example, I have some clients who go, well, managing questions, I've given a presentation. They're in control of that presentation. But then comes the questions. And I panic. I don't understand their accent. I don't understand. And now this can be in general. Let's, of course, communication. But this is where my point is. I mean, if you've just given a key presentation and you need to manage the questions, then suddenly it gets a bit more serious for them. So one of the things I tried to say was, how about when you set the agenda or when you're sort of sending it to people, ask them to send their questions to you beforehand. Maybe that could be one strategy. I'm not saying do it. I said, could this work? Could this help you? Just saying, well, this is my presentation. These are the key points. Are there any questions? So I can reflect upon them and have my answers ready for when we are. So you're managing one part of the Q&A without panicking at that moment.
Yeah, and it takes the pressure off.
And when you read about a lot of, for example, I read a lot about Forbes articles and Harvard Business Review articles, where you're looking at how to manage teams and how to deal with these situations. The advice is similar. So you think it transcends the language. It is to do with, if someone asks you a really complex question, complicated, they catch you off guard, even though you know what your presentation was about. But suddenly they really ask you, wow. And you're there, your mind is ticking, it's going at the rate of knots. Now, in our own language, we have coping strategies. We have tools. Suddenly the words come back to us and we're just finding ways we can do it. In a second language, it's much more difficult. So we have to kind of prepare ourselves for that. So how could we do that? And so it's dealing with those moments that you can't always control, but that you can control up to a point. Now, in general English, and I hear you, but if I'm just chatting to someone, does it really matter if they ask me this complex? The risk is not as high as when you're in the middle of a presentation, you're trying to convince the board of directors about your proposal, and you really don't want to look like a right idiot because you can't answer that question.
And I guess you have an institutional setting, like with your example of offering people to provide the questions early. You have an institutional setting that you can use strategies that you wouldn't have in a general setting. Yeah. Like you can't somebody in the pub say, asks you a question, you should have asked me earlier so I could have checked it. You can't do that. But I guess there are certain tools you have in a business setting that you don't have in the general world.
Exactly. And I mean, the thing is also in a pub, yes, I know people get nervous, but the stakes are not as high, are they? I mean, I don't know. I mean,
exactly.
If someone doesn't quite understand the question, you could sort of say, what do you mean? Or, could you say it in another way? Or I don't quite follow that. What do you mean with that question? We have it all the time.
Yeah.
Even in our own, even if it's our first language, there'll be someone who asks. And, often it's not, I say to my clients, sometimes it's not about you. Maybe that other person hasn't phrased it in a way that's clear.
Yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, especially if it's a native speaker, it's very possible.
Yeah.
According to the research. Yes. Yes. Okay, that's so cool. I'm gonna jump straight to the next one because it's quite an interesting one. We were talking about it a little bit earlier. So I was talking to Chia Swan Chong a couple of weeks ago now. And she said something really interesting to me, and I want to bring this to you as well because I think it's very relevant to what you've been talking about and what you've written about as well. In a way, is she pointed out that the business English world is often ahead of the curve, is often ahead of the sort of English language teaching world more generally. So by that, I mean sort of like the English language teaching research and academic stuff where things are discovered and ideas are put forward. And very often, as Chia was saying, the academic world will come out with something and the business English world would just be like, Yeah, we know. We've been doing this for ages. And a good example of that is English as a lingua franca. You know, this whole phenomenon of people, non-native speakers communicating with non-native speakers. And that sort of became a very big thing in the English teaching sort of academic world, at least. And also it filtered down into the English teaching world more generally. And that was all starting around 2000. But this whole concept of international communication in the business English world had been quite like a fixed thing for a while at that time. Am I being fair in getting those sort of times? And
yeah, I mean, I'm not very good with the timings. You know, sometimes it's interesting because every time I go to conferences, and yes, they talk about this linguistic side, I'm just sitting there thinking, okay, this is all beyond me. But then I'm sitting there exactly thinking, so for me, that's kind of logical. Why are we talking about this in this sort of academic setting that's so I find surreal sometimes, you know, sort of detached from reality, and scares me sometimes. I think, oh, okay, this is way above me, and I'm just this little think it's person. But I'm thinking to myself, why is that groundbreaking when this is the way people communicate? So I think, with international communication, yes, business world, why? Because we have to communicate. If we're going to get this job done, if we need to sell our goods to so-and-so, if we need to trade, we've got to somehow communicate. We've got to somehow get to a point where we both understand each other. So having this, I don't care whether I'm going to make that grammar mistake or whether, I need to understand you. I need to understand what's going on. So it does transcend that, and it becomes this, let's talk international English, whatever that is. Let's speak the language we all understand and forget I need to speak like a native speaker, which I think has been totally dominated by the ELT industry for too long.
Yeah, that's terrible. That whole thing is still a mess. But that's another episode. Yeah. I think you're right, and I think this phrase "soft skills" as well. That's very that became de rigueur around 2010 or something, and yeah, again, the business English world, or let's call it the business communication world. I prefer that term now. Was already doing this stuff because that's what it kind of consisted of much of the time, wasn't it?
Yeah, but because in business we need soft skills.
Yeah,
think about it, you're managing a team, leadership skills. That's all soft skills. That's all how do you show empathy? How are you an empathetic leader? How are you, so for me, it's, when we look at leadership, and I was asking my clients, okay, it's empathy, it's listening, it's involving people, you look at companies, you're looking hierarchical, you look at that, the way there are certain companies that have a different structure. So, you've got this vertical, horizontal, and that's changing so much. And some of my clients who are in change management, you're seeing what's going on. And this is all to do with how you're communicating.
Yeah.
And that also then will change the way people need to communicate with each other, because you've got this hierarchical thing that I can't question my leader because, this is just how it is. You don't question it, but then you move to a different way. And so you have to develop the soft skills also with leadership. How many courses do we have about teaching leadership skills and, the soft skills that you have to have. And I'd like to call them crucial skills rather than soft, because soft feels a bit...
It's misleading, yeah. Core skills, perhaps.
Core skills. I think maybe it's like life skills, right? We're trying to teach, school leavers and pre-university, the life skills. And I think that is also so important in the workplace. It's how do you learn your life skills, which is a huge area, So I don't know. It's.
I like the shape that everything is sort of become in this conversation. This is very strong emphasis on getting a task done and doing it well, rather than learning grammar or logistics vocabulary or whatever. I'm going to do a little quick summary of my favorite bits of what you've said so far. But before we do that, the last question, if that's all right with you. 3 tips. Can you give 3 tips for teachers out there, English teachers who have been told to go and just do some business English, but they have no experience with the business world and they have no experience with any business English? So how should they approach their first lesson, which they're probably terrified of doing?
Ask a couple of questions, sit back and listen to them.
Oh, I like that. Just ask questions and listen. Okay.
Ask them, what's your business reality? What's your reality? What's happening in your world? What's going on? What does it look like, your day, your week, your month? What scares you? What are you proud of how you communicate? You know, one of the I focus a lot on reflection. Most of my programs are about reflecting on how we communicate. And the 2 questions I always ask: what are you most fearful of? But what are you also most can't find my words now. You're most proud of when you communicate in English. I want them to celebrate their successes. So for me, if you're a new teacher going into this, don't be scared of them, but walk in there, be prepared to listen and learn from them. Because they're the ones who are going to teach you what the business world is all about. What they need. You learn what their business context is, who they are communicating with. And then from there, you then can see, how can I help them?
Yeah.
So, and be curious about the business world. If you're not curious about it, it's going to be quite hard to retain your interest. So do some reading. I'm not sort of saying go read too much, but Forbes is a great place to read about what is going on, what are the discussions. I'm not talking about going into the nitty-gritty of sort of economics or any that's hard and boring. But when you're looking at about this, for example, there's the Coach Council in Forbes, where they've got great tips, coaching councils, and they talk about, managing virtual business meetings and, how to do that. I take some of these ideas and I think, well, how do I apply them in the context of my clients? So putting that into that English world of, those are the challenges. Imagine them in English and how can I help them with that? And I don't know whether I've done 2 tips, but
it feels like it could be 2 or it could be 7. It depends how you compartmentalize them.
For me, my big thing, which is then I changed my core message after many years, was help them to communicate, not help them to speak better.
That's it. Yeah, isn't it? Help them to communicate, not speak better. Yeah.
Because my thoughts are, here's the thing. If you want to run a marathon, or if you want to learn a new skill, playing the guitar, whatever it is, you have this wonderful goal there. Think, I've got to do that, and I want to achieve that. But if you don't achieve it, because there's that level, I mean, how on earth, how would you feel? Right? So, I mean, forget the breaking it all down, but I think, let me use what I have now and let me build it slowly. So one of the first questions I ask in my reflection program is, let's start from where you are. Let's look at what it is you can do, what it is you find difficult, where are the gaps, and let's work towards filling those gaps. But I want them to go from a position of strength, so a position of abundance, not a position of scarcity, of I don't have enough English, I don't have enough grammar, I don't have enough words. Now let's look at what you do have. What are you able to do with the language you already have? Then, gradually, you're building their confidence. Because if I can do this little bit with the English I already have, that's going to propel me to think, well, if I can do this, how about if I try this extra little bit? But if we're always going on from the I don't have enough, you're going to give up.
I really like that a lot. Yeah, because this sort of crisis of confidence is very common. And this misconception that you need all the English, you just don't. That's great. If I may, I'm going to recap the golden nuggets from the conversation. So this is great. It's all, to overview it, I'm feeling a very strong sort of communicative approach and less sort of analytical in terms of language. The language is there for communication, not to be studied. So you've got things like what I like to call bridging, which is when people are communicating with each other, you can get better by confirming that you understood what the other person meant, reformulating your own sentences, and very strong advice, listen and pause.
Yeah.
So that's one set of skills that I think everyone can learn from. I'm just looking at them really quickly. I make terrible notes. They're like squiggles. This whole thing about do what you do anyway. Don't go against your own personality. You don't have to be a different person in English. You don't have to, you're not somehow more committed to something because it's in a foreign language. Feel free to walk away from stuff or minimize your engagement if that's the sort of thing you might do anyway. Cool.
Before you start, if I can just say also, often we really need to remind our clients, particularly our business professionals, often these are people who are experts in their field, very highly experienced. Mm-hmm. So I like to remind them, you're coming from a position of strength. You have a lot of experience. You have a lot to offer. Don't forget you're doing this all in a second, third, fourth language. Mm-hmm. Be proud and focus on that expertise you have, that experience you have, and that people need it from you. So do that with the English you have. If you need to add a little bit more, great. But your focus is on your value. Because too often English makes them feel undervalued. Mm-hmm. And I don't want them to do that. You've got to come from the point of that you have a lot to offer.
Yeah.
Another point about listening, sorry.
Sorry, go on. It's good.
The key thing, and it's not necessarily just to do with English, it's we often listen to reply, we don't listen to understand. Mm-hmm. So often when we're listening to people, we're busy thinking about our response. Mm-hmm. We're not just sitting back to go, let me try and understand what your problem is or what your thoughts are, which is a huge need in leadership and managerial skills, how to learn to understand. But it can also be in a general setting. Small talk. I want to chat, but if I'm only going to listen because I want to reply, you're not really interested in me, are you? Mm-hmm. I can tell when someone's just talking to me and then they're sitting there. You can see their brain is whirring and going, she's waiting or he's waiting to just reply. As opposed to, I want to find out all about you and I want to try and understand. So there's a huge difference in that, and people can see it when you really want to understand what they're saying.
Yeah. So this is re-emphasizing the listening.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is great. This is much undervalued. Yeah. I also find that when you feel that you're sort of dying in a conversation, just asking questions is a great way to get out of that, because it just draws the focus on the other person and you get to listen as well. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. And just apart from that, I found that this sort of moving away from this concept of business English and moving into this business communication, or just communication, but in a business setting, makes me feel so much more at ease about the whole thing. And finally, your advice, which was basically one piece with lots of little pieces underneath it, which was ask questions and listen. So I'm sensing a theme, which is great. I mean, this is the takeaway, right? That our listeners can get is ask questions and listen.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if we're talking about teachers, if we're talking about our learners, then it's reflect on how you communicate, focus on how you communicate, focus on that, not on wanting to speak more.
That's it. Yeah. Communication, not language.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know they interact, but to simplify it. Great. Okay. Yeah. And the last one I really, really liked is pretty much the very last point you made. Start from a position of abundance. I might title the podcast episode "Position of Abundance." It sounds so great. And it's a very positive way for our students to start whatever they want to do with their English.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's also a life skill, right? Most of us, there's so much that we always think about, I don't have enough. Whether it is our skills or whether it is money or whether it's, when you think about people always thinking, well, I don't have enough, or I don't have enough money, I don't have enough stuff. It's that whole idea that we just don't, it's always scarcity. And so that pulls you down because that just thinks, you're constantly comparing yourself to other people. And I see it in myself, you're building your business and you'll be looking at somebody else who's doing much better. So there's always that, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not. And that is it's what I hear so loud from my clients. I am not good enough because of my English. And yet there they are, senior professionals. And you're thinking, well, you're going to let a tool like the English language pull all your, sort of suck out all your confidence. No. There's more. You've got that is just a waste of your talent and the value you offer.
Yeah.
So for me, that's what I'm that's my message to people, that you are so much more than a language, because language is just a tool.
Absolutely. Well, for most of our students' needs.
Yes.
Yeah. And yes, yeah. It's in the business world, it really is. Because it's not, most people didn't choose it to be this way. It's just the way it's ended up. So this is just a tool for most people, it's true. This is great. Let's leave it there. But before we finish off, where can we find you online? Where can anyone who's interested in working with you on business communication skills find you? Tell our listeners where to find you.
Right. On my website, englishwithatwist.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. So I think it's Shanthi Cumaraswamy Streat. I also work, I do, I'm also on Instagram and Facebook, but my areas are Instagram and LinkedIn. If people are interested, they can first and foremost, I have a free mini course to join my email list, because then they receive my newsletters, and it's 3 strategies on how you can implement those strategies to start communicating.
Ooh, a free email course. Yeah, that'll tempt some people, I think.
Yeah, and and I also write regularly social media micro posts. Twice a week on LinkedIn and on Instagram, and they're just micro posts about different things about communication. But the main part is englishwithatwist.com. Join my community, see whether you like the posts and the newsletters that I share.
I like it, yeah. Build the community. And so the free email course is available on englishwithatwist.com.
Yes, cool. They can sign up and then get it.
Good place to start, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Well, that's so fantastic. Thank you so much. Really, really thank you very much, Shanthi, for this enlightening talk. It's really set me at ease with the whole business English thing.
No, thank you so much, Gabriel, because I really enjoyed your questions. There were moments when I panicked, thinking, oh no, how am I going to answer them? But no, thank you so much also for giving me the time and the
always.
space.
Cool. Well, that's it. Yeah. Well, thanks so much. And yeah, see you in the future.
Yeah. Look forward to it.
Okay, there we have it. There's not much to add, really. I think the key takeaways here were just learn how to listen more. Listening is incredibly useful and will build your relationship with the person you're speaking to, especially if you ask them questions. And also always remember that the problems you might think you have in English may not be because of your English. This might just be something that is a sort of thing you have issues with in the real world. It might also be something that's a problem with the other person you're speaking to. So when you're dealing with situations in English, always remember that it might not be your language skills that are the problem there. Check that first. And finally, I think the very big, beautiful, lovely, excellent, wonderful, fantastic, fabulous takeaway, marvelous even, from today's conversation is start from a place of abundance. Remember what you have, remember what you're good at, and use that to get further and to improve and to get what you want in the future. Don't freak out and panic about, oh, I don't have enough, I don't have enough, I don't have enough. Look at what you have, build from there. All right, cool. I'm going to leave you alone to do whatever crazy stuff you're going to do next. And I'll talk to you next time.